Well, this is my birthday. By the way, the president of Brazil, his birthday was March 21, mine's 22, and we had kind of a little thing together about that. But March 22nd is called World Water Day, and we're going to tell you more about that coming up. We've got a sample well, some of the things that we have been showing. Wendy?
And as we mentioned, today is Pat's 89th birthday. We are going to be celebrating this entire hour. This is an awesome occasion. We have some surprises, so stay tuned for that.
But first in the news, you know, I was with General Benny Gantz, who is a prominent Israeli, up on the Golan Heights, and we saw down what it was. And now we realized the strategic importance of the Golan to Israel. And at this point, there is no way under heaven that Israel will ever give it back. But President Trump is standing strong with Israel. He recognizes the Golan Heights as part of the Jewish state. The Golan is critical to Israel's security. It sits on the border with Syria, is strategic in protecting northern Israel. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls the president's move a miracle. And all this happens as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visits Israel. CBN's David Brody is traveling with Pompeo on his Middle East, and they talked about President Trump's strong support for the nation of Israel.
There he is. You doing well?
Walking firmly through the door, Mike Pompeo is a determined man. Both our Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and I had the opportunity to interview the Secretary of State. It was part politics, part policy, and part spiritual, especially for a strong Christian who experienced a refreshing in the Holy Land.
The Western Wall, I was there with you. What was that experience like? I mean, how impactful was something like that?
This was incredibly special to be there with Israeli Prime Minister and the ambassador from the United States to Israel. Was really an important moment. It was special for me as a Christian, and it was special, I think, to show the commitment the United States has to this democracy, this Jewish nation of Israel.
President Trump showed that strong commitment again by announcing, through Twitter of course, that it's time for the U.S. to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the disputed Golan Heights. Music to the ears of the Israeli Prime Minister.
He did it again. First, he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. embassy here. Then he pulled out of the disastrous Iran treaty and reimposed sanctions.
Netanyahu called it a Purim miracle as Jews around the world celebrate how God saved them through Esther from the evil Haman and the Persians. With modern-day Persians in Iraq threatening them now, and with President Trump boldly making moves in support of Israel, it begged for an obvious question.
Could it be that President Trump right now has been sort of raised for such a time as this, just like Queen Esther, to help save the Jewish people from an Iranian menace?
As a Christian, I certainly believe that's possible. It was remarkable. So we were down in the tunnels where we could see 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, if I have the history just right, to see the remarkable history of the faith in this place. And the work that our administration has done to make sure that this democracy in the Middle East of this Jewish state remains, I'm confident that the Lord is at work here.
But with all the benefits Israel has received from this administration, will there be a price to pay in the long-awaited Mideast peace plan?
What can you do to allay their fears of something like dividing Jerusalem in the upcoming peace plan?
So I've seen the details of the plan as it stands now. I'm sure there'll be things moved just a bit as time goes on. But evangelicals of the world should know that this is a vision for what might ultimately lead to this resolution of this conflict. And I think this plan presents a vision for that, but doesn't sacrifice any of these core principles, frankly, of any of the faiths.
As for the Jewish faith, attacks have been almost a way of life. Recently, anti-Semitism has seen a resurgence worldwide and even surfaced within the Democrat Party. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has come under fire for some of her remarks.
How concerned are you about the rise of not just anti-Semitism around the world, but in that Democrat Party as well?
To see this from a member of Congress like Congresswoman Omar to speak about anti-Semitism in that way is of great concern. It's great concern to me. This administration speaks the truth. And anti-Semitism is unacceptable in any form from anyone, but to see it come from one of America's leaders is just abhorrent.
Another concern, especially among many evangelicals, was President Trump's announcement to pull troops out of Syria, putting Christians and many others in the region as sitting ducks. Since then, the administration now says a military presence will remain, something the Secretary of State backed up in our conversation.
The challenges in Syria remain. The United States intends to remain. We are close to the destruction of the caliphate. It will be completed very, very soon.
This job is not for the faint of heart. But the good news, so to speak, is that Pompeo says he's rooted in the most important thing.
The task that I have is informed by my understanding of my faith, my belief in Jesus Christ as the Savior. It doesn't drive answers and outcomes every day. We all as Christians are searching, but it does inform how I try to treat every human being with dignity and respect in ways that Christians ought to. I don't always live up to that standard, but it does inform the way I think about the world.
Well, David Brody joins us now from Jerusalem. David, Mike Pompeo is an amazing guy. What he had to say is remarkable.
Oh, for sure. And as a matter of fact, we were a bit surprised, Chris Mitchell and I, that he actually named Congressman Omar by name on foreign soil about anti-Semitism. That shows you how deep the political divide has become, Pat. And of course, the biblical comparison, Donald Trump and Queen Esther. And you can imagine anytime you put Donald Trump and a biblical figure together, you know, the media is going to go haywire. And apparently they already have after our report.
David, let me ask you, you know, the Democrats have had tremendous support among the Jewish community. I understand a number of the announced candidates for the presidency are not going to go to the AIPAC summit this week. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, it's funny. First of all, you're right. I mean, there are plenty of those Democrats running for president that won't make it. Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders. You can go down the list. Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke. They're all not going to be there. And it's just fascinating to watch, Pat. I mean, you know the deal with AIPAC throughout the years. It was Democrats showing up, Republicans showing up, and it was really a nonpartisan pro-Israel situation. But there is a major divide between what's going on in the Democrat Party today with that progressive, liberal, the AOC wing, as I like to call them. And you've got that. And then look who is speaking at AIPAC. Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, the old guard of the Democrats. And that says everything you need to know about where the Democrat Party is heading.
Do you think the Jewish people are going to wake up and begin to shift their alliance from the Democrats to the Republicans? They've been a key funding source, I'm sure, for the Democrats.
Mm-hmm. So here's the short answer, Pat. No, but with an asterisk. And that asterisk could be 1, 2, 3 percentage points or so in favor of a Donald Trump or Republicans. And that can make a huge difference in elections, especially if Donald Trump suffers in some sort of other area, whether it be with suburban women or with potentially even evangelicals. And so that asterisk becomes crucial going into 2020. And I think that's important to watch. But why won't they turn? Look, there's a lot to unpack, and we can spend many, many hours discussing this. But, you know, you have the Orthodox Jews that overall are very supportive of Donald Trump. But the American Jews, Reformed American Jews, look, I grew up as a Reformed American Jew, so I get it. I've lived there, and I know the deal. The philosophy is liberal. Therefore, they fit with the Democrats. That's the way they want to go. And they'll say they're pro-Israel, but their philosophy from a liberal standpoint sides with the Democrats, and that is going to be very hard to undo.
Well, David, thank you very much. I appreciate your analysis, and stay well, and we look forward to hearing another report from On the Road with Mike Pompeo. David Brody, tremendous guy. Well, in other news, the president says that Fed policies hindered the economy last year. I'm not sure I agree with that, but anyhow, he said them. I think the Fed's been very reserved in its approach to money in this country so far. John Jessup has more of that story from Washington. Here's John.
Thanks, Pat. President Trump is blaming the Federal Reserve for holding back economic growth in 2018, and he's said to be considering appointing one of his longtime supporters to the board. Bloomberg News reports the Heritage Foundation's Stephen Moore might be on the president's list. Moore is a Trump campaign advisor and a frequent guest here on the 700 Club. The president reportedly telling Fox News that if the Fed hadn't increased interest rates, the economy would have grown more than 4% last year. Well, Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido says Nicolás Maduro wouldn't dare put him in jail. This after security forces detained Guaido's top aide, Roberto Marrero, in a raid on his home Thursday. Maduro's justice minister says Marrero is under arrest for supporting an insurrection. Guaido is in a political standoff with Maduro. Some 50 nations, including the United States, recognize him as Venezuela's legitimate leader. The country's legislature voted Guaido interim president after charges Maduro stole the recent election. Pat, the Venezuelan crisis is on President Trump's agenda today with Caribbean leaders.
Well, you know, I don't mean to sound like a war hawk, but there comes a time when a group of thugs are terrorizing innocent civilians that it's going to take force to get those thugs out. And sooner or later, the nations of the OAS are going to have to realize they have a job to perform and they have to do it. But they apparently are very reluctant. And it seems like if you know, John Bolton has said that if there's a move on Guaido, we'll consider it very, very, I don't know, hostile or alarming. But nevertheless, something has got to be doing something about it. Now, we're going to turn to something here at home that is very alarming, tragedy in the heartland of America, and John has more on that.
That is right, Pat. Forecasters say 200 million Americans are at risk for flooding this spring. The eastern two-thirds of the country is especially at risk. The dire forecast comes as the upper Midwest faces deadly flooding this week. Heather Sells has the story.
The National Weather Service says this spring could bring potentially historic and unprecedented flooding. Already, the upper Midwest is battling rising waters. On Thursday, the governor of Missouri declared a state of emergency, noting widespread flooding that is closing roads and threatening levees. In small towns like Craig, people are evacuating.
Oh, I'm very grateful that they opened the church, because I didn't know where I was going.
The Missouri River crested its banks after heavy rains and snowmelt earlier this month. The waters have killed 3, damaged thousands of homes, and busted some 20 levees in Missouri, Nebraska, and Iowa.
This is a very fragile situation as we talk about the ground being very saturated. We have 2 to 10 inches of liquid within the snowpack over the northern tier of states. So you melt that off. You have some more rain on top of that, you're going to see additional rises, and this is going to be a long process.
The flooding is also a disaster for agriculture, wiping out tens of thousands of acres. In eastern Nebraska, the National Guard is dropping hay bales to stranded cattle. Operation Blessing is setting up in Fremont, Nebraska. The governor says that thousands have lost their homes. An Operation Blessing team is on the ground meeting with flood victims and assessing their homes to help with cleanup.
Oftentimes they're very surprised that somebody would come from across the country to help them, a stranger helping a stranger. And so we've seen a lot of emotions that are coming out as a result of not just the initial disaster, but the fact that somebody's coming to help them.
Out west, heavy winter rains and warm weather are causing early snowmelt and runoff. Authorities are increasing the flow out of some dams to avoid flooding. Forecasters say the historic flooding could get worse as floodwaters in the upper Midwest head downstream.
Heather Sells is joining us now from the CBN newsroom. Heather, I've read reports that there are just massive amounts of snow that have fallen in the Sierra Nevada mountains. What have you learned about the flooding threats in California?
Right. Well, you know, we report a lot from California, Pat, and it's an incredible situation out there. They have received a record snowpack in the Sierras in February. We're talking about upwards of 500, 600 feet at some ski resorts like Squaw Valley and Mammoth, 50 feet of snow there. So that's a lot of water to manage. And the government right now is saying that California only has a minor threat for flooding, but water managers are definitely keeping an eye on this snowpack, watching how quickly it's going to melt. And in some cases, they are already increasing the flow out of these dams, out of these reservoirs, so that the water can empty out into the ocean and that communities won't be flooded. But they really aren't alarmed at the fact that this could be a massive flooding situation? The government is saying a minor flood threat, but as we were reporting just now, they are already beginning to increase the flow out of these dams. So I think water managers know they've got to keep an extremely close eye on this situation. Well, Heather, thank you very much for that report. Appreciate it.
Wendy.
All right, lots going on in the news.
Yeah.